Okay, welcome back. This is episode 5 of True North. Last session we talked about the fact that we've had 2 generations of young people, and well, there's many adults out here that were raised in the Canadian school system, and you didn't know this, you were under secular humanism the whole time. And it's turned you 180 degrees away from our Christian roots. Most of you have already decided you don't want to even listen to these segments because you recognize them as coming from the Bible. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you got to factor this in, okay? Make up your mind after you've watched all these sessions, not before, okay? You have free will, and you were taught secular humanism against your free will. You didn't even know they were teaching you this. So now, fight for your thought life, okay? It's a war. Okay, episode 5, what will happen if we don't get turned around? And remember, the slideshow is actually going to be at the very end of this, the video. You can go through it individually and use the slideshow yourself. Okay, here we go. We discussed what was so special about our Christian roots. It gave us a moral compass. We discovered the governing dynamics or the design factors of a free, successful civilization, and that these are contained in God's law, summarized by the 10 Commandments, especially the Golden Rule. Francis Schaeffer, we'll quote him again, all the benefits which we know, I would repeat, which we have taken so easily and so much for granted, are unique. What are those benefits? All the perks of a free society, folks. I just need to remind you of this. We are not like so many nations of the world where they don't have freedom. The problem is we've got freedom. Well, all we stand to do is lose that freedom. We are living in the perks of a free society. We have unique hopes based on a Christian heritage, or we had, for instance, the hopes of immortality, everlasting life, and a wonderful afterlife, meeting our loved ones again. My goodness, we had great hopes at one time in history. And then also, the other benefit is the present superstructure. For instance, we have a heck of a lot of specially shared resources. Now, the Western world is living at the end of the Christian era and doesn't seem to know it. It is Christian ideology, the Christian belief system, that has brought us this far. And if we turn to these beliefs and nurture them again, we will see more of the success, freedom, prosperity, and hopefulness that we had at the birth of this nation. Because it is the Christian hope that drives us forward, and it's the death of this hope that will stop us in our tracks. But why? Schaeffer's not the only social philosopher to say that the society runs on God's law. Rabbi Zacharias said the same thing in his book, Deliver Us from Evil. He said, the law of God is the source of freedom. Any culture that is not based on the foundation of the law of God or of the Creator has come to the end of its tether. That is because life in the natural universe was never intended to be the final step for mankind. We were always intended to be intended for the ultimate step into the afterlife promised in the Christian scriptures. Think about this for a moment. If this is all there is, it simply isn't enough. 60, 70 years of life, to age, to die, to leave all your loved ones behind? That seems so pointless and purposeless. It's simply not enough to have spent 60 or 70 years here on this earth looking up at the universe and then be told, this is all there is. After death, nothing. And this is precisely what secular humanism and atheism teaches, that nothing happens after you die except death. This is an accurate analysis of the end result philosophy of atheism is admitted by honest atheists. 2 evolutionists, Jaron Lanier, a computer scientist, and Richard Dawkins, a professor, and everybody knows him now at Oxford, and an ardent Darwinist and atheist, exchanged this dialogue in an issue of Psychology Today magazine a few years ago. Lanier said, there's a large group of people who simply are uncomfortable with accepting evolution because it leads to what they perceive as a moral vacuum in which their best impulses have no basis in nature. To which Dawkins said, all I can say is, that's just tough. We just have to face up to the truth. I have now been to the funerals of several young people who have committed suicide. In every case, their diagnosis was puzzling. Several were said to have been suffering from depression. Depression has now in our society been termed a mental illness, and it is spreading to our society. Unfortunately, it's being diagnosed as a psychological or physiological illness that can be treated with drugs. While drugs will help a person through an episode, what will help a person more is a living belief system. Atheism does not have a living belief system. I'm sorry, but the belief that we are here to live and die and then cease to exist is simply error. And if this error is not met with truth, the individual gradually begins to see his horizons shrink down to nothing. Maybe you saw the 4 words printed in the True North flyer. Hope, purpose, direction, power. Did you read those? The Creator designed us to need these. The cows in the field and the chickens in the barnyard do not need them. But we were created in the image of the Creator, and we were meant to live forever. As I have written elsewhere, and others have also, we are born with eternity in our hearts. And when we are brought up in a system which categorically denies this, we run up against an existentialist wall. Maybe you need to listen to the Pink Floyd album, The Wall. What do you think the Pink Floyd discovered? They discovered the wall. Well, folks, I'm looking at you. I'm saying you need to discover the door. There's an existentialist wall that comes from the teaching of humanism. Now, when I use the term existential, that's the second piece of philosophical jargon that I've used in this series. I use it now because I need to explain, especially to you parents out there listening to this series, that this is what is being fed to young people in Philosophy 101. What is existentialism? It's a philosophy that requires us to confront the nature of life, of living, and of existence itself. Cows and chickens do not wonder why they exist, but any thoughtful, intelligent human being eventually is faced with this. The Christian Bible was not the only source of the law. It also provided our civilization with a complete overview of the purpose of life. In a nutshell, the Creator wants the universe filled with life. He has not only made the universe so diverse, so vast, so full of mystery and potential that every living person born into the universe should find joy, happiness, and fulfillment forever. He has made a way for us to live forever. He has designed us for eternity. This may come as a surprise to those who have never read the Bible. And really, I can't be expected to unpack a concept as big as this one here at the end of True North. But I introduce the concept here and now to try to tell you that without an eternal future, without the hope of an afterlife, the walls of reality begin to close in on us until we find ourselves locked in a box. And that's what's happening to the Canadian culture. We were birthed as a country when the Western world was still energized by Christian ideology. It seems we were almost the last country to be birthed by that ideology, and then the box closed. The language I use is not only mine. Francis Schaeffer said the same things back in the 1980s, as I've already mentioned. History was on his side. Other historians and anthropologists agree. Have you ever seen the Tytler cycle? Better study it carefully. I came across it myself only a few years ago. It is only one of several such graphs of the life and death of nations. I show it to you quickly here and we'll point out where we are, but of course, to explain it further, I'd have to go into another lesson. Look from the 1 o'clock. Every nation starts with spiritual faith of some kind. And they move along to courage, liberty, which is freedom, abundance, and then suddenly something happens. The nation starts to turn. They turn into selfishness, complacency, apathy, dependence, and eventually back into bondage. That's exactly what's happened in Canada. Our nation has become selfish. We not only live only for ourselves, we care less about the next generation or anybody else. We've even got to the point of saying, I can make my own rules. I can make my own laws. Folks, that's the ultimate in selfishness, and it's already happened. Our society is turned in the Tytler cycle of history. Study it out. They're living in a fool's paradise. And that is rapidly what is the West is becoming, a fool's paradise. People have abandoned the biblical laws on which this country, this civilization was founded, and now we are sending signals all over the world, inviting people into our society, and we are saying to them, bring your own beliefs and change ours, because all beliefs are the same. They all have the same value. It simply isn't true. As I've said before and must repeat again, we need to tell the rest of the world, especially those who do not have our Christian belief system, that those of you who like our ways of life but don't like our beliefs, it was our beliefs that made our way of life. The Soviets call it the demoralization of a country. The Tytler cycle is just one way of explaining how a nation can be demoralized or turned around. Interestingly enough, the enemies of Christendom have often devised schemes to undermine and destroy us. Maybe I need to read Flanders Fields. I'll do that in a minute. Let me read in Flanders Fields. You've heard it every Remembrance Day. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses row on row that mark our place. And in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset go, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. That was written by John McCrae in May 1915. And of course, the secular humanist revisionists have gotten hold of this, and they've made him out to be a warmonger. They don't understand. He was talking from a Christian perspective. He knew at that time there was an ideology that was starting to eat up the Christian world. And he said, we've got to fight against the ideology. Folks, if you don't fight false ideology, eventually you wind up having to fight on the battlefield. We're heading towards that again in our generation. We don't need to fight people and kill them. We just need to get them to change their wrong ideas. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Folks, false ideology leads people into war, misery, and the grave. Can't go any further here. Look at the slides yourself. I explain about the Cold War, demoralization. Can't do it here. Now, let me just summarize a little bit. Look up the stuff yourself. Okay, I'll put the slides at the end. Let me say that demoralization will happen to any culture once it's begin to turn, whether they are well off or not so well off. It's not their circumstances or their economy or their environment that precipitates demoralization. It's their ideology. Ravi Zacharias, whom I mentioned earlier, who wrote Deliver Us from Evil, said this: meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. We have a whole society of people that are wallowing in pleasure but have no purpose in life. And they're being driven to pointlessness and eventually even suicide. Now, I include this, and I can't go into detail here. The following interview was conducted back in 1985 with a trained subversive KGB agent, Yuri Bezmenov. He lays out the 4 steps used to transform the thinking and behavior of an entire population over generations. I'm not going to go into details here, but there's plenty of material to show that ideology that has come into infiltrated the Western world is set out to destroy us. And you can go and on these, there's little links to these sites, check these things out for yourself. For goodness sake, it's not just the Christians that know this, but other people that study history. Matter of fact, when you read that material, which I'm not including here on the screen, it'll sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, a conspiracy nut. I don't care less about conspiracy. I care about truth. The secular humanist takeover of the Canadian education system and the Canadian medium, I don't know if it was a conspiracy, but it's done the job. Okay, demoralization is what we've been talking about. What happens to a society once they've turned away from God's law and God's boundary and truth? They become a demoralized culture. Demoralization is an amazingly accurate word because it describes both the cause of the problem and the effect. First, a nation is demoralized. The basis for its moral and ethical foundation is demolished. That's already happened. Moral relativism replaces, that's the word for it, replaces the designer's boundaries of right and wrong with man-made whims and preferences. Decisions made contrary to design bring greater and greater damaging consequences until eventually citizens become demoralized. In other words, directionless, discouraged, and depressed. What's the common denominator among some of our society's problems? Young people depressed and committing suicide, broken homes, lack of hope for the future. Marriage, 50% of marriages are failing. Why is that? Because we've lost the moral roots of our culture. It's as simple as that. Check into it. Speaking of depression, we are experiencing an epidemic of depression in the population, especially amongst young people. I'm going to repeat what I showed earlier, the slide to do with the broken generation. The byline is, a shocking number of Canadian students feel depressed, even suicidal. Why our best and brightest are so troubled. Tell you what, folks, you can't remove the hope of an afterlife. You can't remove purpose and not expect the bottom to fall out of the culture. If I'm talking to some adults right now, the only way you're going to be able to help this next generation is to get back to the roots that you should have been teaching your kids all along. Our young people have no moral compass, no way to tell right from wrong, good from bad. They can't tell the bad guys from the good guys. Their world has been divided into liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat, left and right, which is ridiculous. These are vague and unhelpful, negotiating through the sea of issues. A young lady was asked what she thought of the web with its remarkable access to all information. She said, all that data is good, but what good is it if I can't tell right from wrong? I can never tell for sure what's true. Folks, without the moral compass of the Bible, you can't tell right from wrong. Ravi Zacharias, quoting him again, he said, ethical relativism makes evil almost undefinable. In other words, our generation have no idea what's evil and what's good. For instance, we're getting ISIS coming around blowing up cities, disseminating hatred, and we can't see them as an enemy. We can't see their ideology as wrong. We can't, folks, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, every able man, woman, and woman in America got in line to join the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. Why? They knew who the enemy was, and they said, we're going to go over and stop them. In our generation, as soon as 9/11, for instance, happened, what did everybody do? All we had was a major departure into, we had more anti-war stuff. Something's wrong. Now, what's a lack of ability to discern good from evil have to do with depression? It's got everything to do with helplessness and hopelessness. Helplessness and hopelessness comes when people have lost their moral compass. People now feel helpless to make even the simplest decisions without experts. And when the experts don't have any clear answers, hopelessness starts to set in. I'm going to give you an example of hopelessness. Here's a couple of tracts I wrote after going to several funerals of young people. Folks, young people are committing suicide, and we're going to have an epidemic of it because of hopelessness. But then I came across this strange article in the New Yorker magazine, The Trauma of Facing Deportation. In Sweden, hundreds of refugee children have fallen unconscious after being informed that their families will be expelled from the country. What had happened was Sweden was getting so many refugees from surrounding countries that they had to stop they had to close their borders. And they even had to announce that refugees that still had not yet been given immigrant status were to be sent back to their home countries. Well, all of a sudden, many of the teenagers started to experience a phenomenon that the Swedish called uppgivenhet syndrome. What would happen is the young people would fall into a coma. These girls are in a coma. The doctors couldn't wake them no matter what they did. They fall into a Snow White trance. The article's available, and maybe I have a link there. All I'm trying to say is young people with no hope, they get to the place of hopelessness, and it's a physiological thing that can cause them to either commit suicide, or in these cases, it's almost like a psychological suicide. And you need to read the article, go a little further. Okay, I can't go any further here. What good is a compass if it leads you in the wrong direction? Our compasses here in Canada have been reset to the ideology of humanism and atheism, and we have lost our direction. What is lacking is a solid ideological basis for our society, something to give us hope, purpose, direction, and power. All we're trying to do in New York and True North is to alert you to this. You need to do some homework. What can be done to turn this situation around? It has to be done by a return to the ideology that transformed the Christian West to start with. The ideology that gave us the hope, purpose, direction, and power to succeed and prosper. The strength that came from governing principles and the Creator who designed them. You need to do your own study about this. The reason I say this is the truth of Christianity has been suppressed now for 2 generations. As a matter of fact, the education system controls the minds of people. The only way to even discover this truth is returning to the Bible. Listen to this. Francis Schaeffer said this. No totalitarian authority, no authoritarian state can tolerate those who have an absolute by which to judge that state and its action. I was 17 years old when I went to high school. When I got involved in the system, I said, there's something wrong here, but I could never figure it out. When I was 30 years old, finally someone told me the truth. The system has been shipwrecked, and the only way to tell that there was something wrong with the system, I had to have an absolute standard by which to judge the state and its actions. And that standard was the Word of God, which is all that we're trying to show right now. There's a role your country needs to play. They need to change the education system back to, they need to get the rules back. Everybody needs to play by the same rules. Now, Canada is still generally governed by the same governing principles of Christian ideology. Even if the application is starting to wander, we've just got to make some course correction. And there's just got to be a reawakening to our Christian roots. But as individuals, we must all consider our responsibility in light of design. So the last session will have to be some of the solutions. What do we need to change? What are the solutions to the situation? We'll discuss that in the next and the last episode.